Right, some differing pieces now. Scientists have found a 1,000 light year bubble, local bubble, in the past week or so. Now I wonder what that could possibly be, I mused sarcastically. The think tanks and media got their distraction story in tennis over the past week or so. And the number one player, Djokovic, who's unvaxxed and anti-vaccine, and all of it designed to make their point and sway public opinion and continue to divide the public via their opinions. Now, eventually, Djokovic was deported, and so the think tanks of zero intelligence are now convinced their staged event worked. Not quite. Because in reality, tennis is an elitist, tough-based sport anyway, largely only played in elitist, fee-charging public schools and kept away from the general schools, as one would rather not have to mix with the riffraff of society. And that is the general attitude of that sport. And the tennis audiences are largely similar. Money-based people's domain, and their crowds resemble the peanut gallery in the Hunger Games movie, filled with gaudy coiffeurs, guffawing, little finger protrusions, and a pompous overview of how they are somehow better than the rest. But it's all an illusion game. So the umpire or judge sits on his high chair residing over his court, passing judgment like a lower version of the AI Sky God. And they have served the public with their judgments of how things will play out. And they think it is game, set and match. Wrong. As we the people have rallied back, and will deliver the ultimate to these clowns and let them know who is the real decision maker. And the simple solution to this is boycott the Australian Open. Don't attend the games, don't watch it on their advertisement fest TV either. Because if no one watches it and we get low viewing TV figures and empty stadiums, then it is they who will lose to love. And we the people have set a match to their game and manipulation tactics. There are claims now in certain quarters that the Japanese ruling class based in Kyoto, who have claimed it originated in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. Why is that no longer a surprise, given the tactics of Japan in World War II? It was they, largely, who killed 20 to 15 million Chinese in the most brutal of ways. And not to mention their awful treatment of the prisoners of war. And these people go back to the ancient Assyrian king, Ashurnasirpal II, who ruled from 883 to 859 BC. And he said, I built a pillar over and against the city gate, and I flayed all the chiefs who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Eerie familiar to some reports out of the SS camps, is it not? He also went on and burned, blinded and beheaded rebels, set women ablaze, and condemned opposing soldiers to die of dehydration in the desert. And all too familiar in terms of utter brutality, because it's the same program run by varying entities is why. So the Japanese ruling class came out of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Well, I never. This report comes in, which has kind of been put on the back bench. But they will wheel it out again, but they've got another news item, which I'll cover later. And it said, Earth is in the midst of its sixth mass extinction event, and this time caused by human hands, a new study suggests. And it said Earth has had 5 mass extinction events caused by natural phenomena. No. And they said whether that be natural climate shifts or asteroid impacts. And this 6th one, however, was anything but natural, according to a study published in a peer-reviewed academic journal, Biological Reviews. If only the experts knew the real story, they would not write such loop-based rubbish. And that's what it is. And they said this is not even a new phenomenon. Rather, it's been going on since at least 1500 CE. What a coincidence that is. If you followed the timeline of From Russia with Love, you will not be surprised. And it said Earth was once home to 2 million known species. And according to the study, however, since the 1500s, as many as 7.5 to 13% of species may have been lost, and that numbers anywhere from 150,000 to 260,000 different species. That coincides with the rise of the bloodline families, and also the plague around that time, which was engineered. Did they consider that? No, of course not, you see. They want to blame the people so they can tax them even more for fake climate change. And they said some deny this is happening, or rather they deny that decline in many species or outright extinction of them is a sign of a mass extinction event. No one's denying that. What we're denying is the program behind it. But the study led by University of Hawaii's Robert Cowie argues that this is the result of bias. Now, the bias, Mr. Cowie, is to deflect it all onto the people based on a greed-based program, who incidentally are the descendants of the very people who has done more environmental damage than all the people combined. That is the reality. And the likes of Mr. Cowie has to think more deeply to cover topics of this ilk, instead of wheeling out pre-prepared scripts. Now, recently we mentioned mouse utopia in a piece. And it's very important to understand and grasp this. And this piece goes a bit deeper as to what unfolded. And this area was illuminated by ethnology, which is the scientific study of animal behaviour. And one of the more famous ethnologists was John B. Calhoun, who was best known for his mouse experiments in the 1960s when he worked for the National Institute for Mental Health. And what he did was he put 4 pairs of mice in a 9 by 4.5 foot metal pen, complete with water dispensers, tunnels, food bins, and also nesting boxes. And he provided all the food and water they needed, ensured that no predator could gain access, and in essence it was a mouse utopia. Or was it? Now, his intent was to observe the effects on the mice of population density, but the experiment produced results that went way beyond that. And he said, I largely speak of mice, but my thoughts are on man. And he said, at first, the mice did well. Their numbers doubled every 55 days. But after 600 days, with enough space to accommodate as many as another 1,600 rodents, the population peaked at 2,200 and began to decline precipitously, straight down to the extinction of the entire colony. And this was in spite of all their material needs being met, with no effort required on the part of any mouse. And the turning point in the mouse Utopia, Calhoun observed, occurred on day 315, which equals 9, when the first signs appeared of a breakdown in social norms and structure, and aberrations included the following: females abandoning their young, males no longer defending their territory, and both sexes becoming more violent and aggressive. Deviant behaviour, sexual and social, mounted with each passing day. And the last 1,000 mice to be born tended to avoid stressful activity and focus their attention increasingly on themselves. Does that sound familiar? And Jan Kuban from Warsaw and a Polish cybernetician considers Calhoun's experiment as one of the most important in human history. And he created the Physics of Life website, where he elaborates on the meaning and significance of the ethnologist's work about the final stages of the mouse utopia. And he writes, other young mice growing into adulthood exhibited an even different type of behaviour. And Calhoun called these individuals the beautiful ones. And their time was devoted solely to grooming, eating and sleeping, a bit like the celebrities then. And they never involved themselves with others, engaged in sex, nor would they fight. And all appeared outwardly as a beautiful exhibit of the species with keen, alert eyes and a healthy, well-kept body. But these mice, however, could not cope with unusual stimuli. Though they looked inquisitive, they were in fact very stupid. And because of the externally provided abundance of water and food, combined with zero threats from any predators, the mice never had to acquire resources of their own. And the young mice never observed such actions, and so they never learned them. And the life skills necessary for survival faded away. And as Kuban notes, utopia, when one has everything at any moment, for no expenditure, prompts decline in responsibility, effectiveness and awareness of a social dependence, and finally, as Dr. Calhoun's study showed, it led to self-extinction. Just like the Elites. Now, the behavioural sink of self-destructive conduct in Calhoun's experiment, which he replicated on numerous occasions, has since been mostly interpreted as resulting from crowded conditions. And demographers warn that humans might succumb to similar aberrations if world population should ever exceed some imaginary optimal maximum. We haven't got that many, nowhere near. And others like Kuban point out that the mice utopia fell apart well before the mouse enclosure was full, and even at the peak of the population, some 20% of nesting beds were unoccupied. And he was also correct in suggesting that a more likely culprit in the mice demise was this: the lack of a healthy challenge. If you take away the motivation to overcome obstacles, notably the challenge then of providing for oneself and family, and you deprive individuals of an important stimulus that would otherwise encourage learning what works and what doesn't, and possibly even pride in accomplishment. And maybe, just maybe, personal growth in each mouse was inhibited by the welfare state conditions in which they lived. And Calhoun suggested a parallel to humanity. Herein is the paradox of a life without work or conflict. When all sense of necessity is stripped from life of an individual, life ceases to have purpose, and the individual dies in spirit. And by relieving individuals of challenges, which then deprives them of purpose, the welfare state is an utterly unnatural and antisocial contrivance. And in the mouse experiment, the individuals ultimately lost interest in the things that perpetuate the species. They self-isolated, lockdowns, overindulged themselves, or turned to violence. Does that ring a bell? And Charles Murray's 1984 book Losing Ground, or George Gilder's earlier work Wealth and Poverty, are said to be good reads that will guarantee you will hear that bell. Or if nothing else, ponder these prophetic words from one of the otherwise short-sighted opportunistic architects of the American welfare state, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He said in 1935, "The lessons of history, confirmed by the evidence immediately before me, show conclusively that continued dependence upon relief induces a spiritual and moral disintegration fundamentally destructive to the national fibre." And he said to dole out relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. And I can think of one big difference between Calhoun's Utopia and the human welfare state, and it does not weigh in humanity's favour. Because for the mice, everything truly was free. No mouse was taxed, and so another mouse could benefit. But in the human welfare state, however, one human's benefit is a cost to another or to many, a fact that rarely acts as an incentive for work, savings, investment, or other positive behaviours. And that suggests that a human welfare state, with its seductive subsidies for some and punishing taxes for others, delivers a double blow that was not present in the mouse welfarism. And so to what extent do the mouse utopia lessons apply to we humans? Well, perhaps the words from the economist Thomas Sowell will make people think. The welfare state shields people from the consequences of their own mistakes, allowing irresponsibility to continue and to flourish among ever wider circles of people. We should not need mice or other animals to teach us that, but perhaps they can. Now, organised charity, like the welfare. If people cared and shared, we wouldn't need welfare or charity. But this was said in 1922 by Margaret Sanger, those of you who've listened to From Russia with Love will be very familiar with her. And she said organised charity itself is the symptom of a malignant social disease. Except her acceptance of such mass charity from the Rockefeller Foundation is apparently lost on her. But there are signs in national and state parks all over America that warn visitors, please don't feed the animals. And some of those government-owned parks provide further explanation, such as the animals may bite or it makes them dependent. And the National Park Service's website for Sleeping Bear Dunes in Michigan advises it transforms wild and healthy animals into habitual beggars. And studies have shown that panhandling animals have a shorter lifespan. And what would happen if animals in the wild could count on human sources for their diet and never had to hunt or scrounge? What if, in other words, we humans imposed a generous welfare state on our furry friends? Would the resulting experience offer any lessons for humans who might be subjected to similar conditions? Not having to work for food and shelter sounds also appealing and compassionate, doesn't it? But at what cost to our own development? That is the key. At what cost to our own development? Would people suddenly use their free time for personal development, or pursue materialistic exploits, play computer games, or be on social media acting like children all day? But our own personal pets live in a sort of welfare state. Moreover, for the most part, they seem to like it. Our pets get free food, homes, healthcare. But that makes us their master, does it not? And we in return generally get loving affection back, unless you own a spy. And so it seems like a win-win. So maybe a welfare state can work after all. Right? Wrong. Is because perhaps the human pet welfare state works because one of the parties has the brain the size of a golf ball or a pomegranate. And that is why the universal basic income would be a disaster. Our lives and our development is built around work. And so are our own interactions. And often we find our love partners there as well, or certainly a friend circle by and large. It's built around work. You take that away, and to me at least, our lives will resemble a permanent lockdown for far too many of our society. And maybe the lockdown was an algorithm test for that very occurrence.